Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And as usual, we're pre-taping the Thursday before our Monday air date. And we're pre-taping the day after another one of these school shootings that took place in Parkland, Florida.
Yes, Broward County, right?
Broward County, yeah. It was the counties actually run the school districts, and it was a Broward County school. And I believe it was a 19-year-old discontented young man who opened fire.
Right, a former student who had been disciplined and ejected, I guess.
I think he had been dismissed from the school, and evidently there were stories being told by some of the students that they had seen his guns and he had threatened to do just what he did.
Right, this persona wasn't new to them.
Right. Turns out that some of them were not surprised that he turned out to be the perpetrator of this particular crime. His name, I believe, was Nikolas Cruz, spelled with a K, Nikols. And the interesting thing about today's breaking news on that one is that there's a group of white supremacists in that area of Florida who, according to the Daily Beast's headline, claim that this young man, Nikolas Cruz, trained with them. So I have no way of knowing how accurate the Daily Beast story is.
Right.
But
I heard it from another source over the radio this morning, something similar. I assume I shouldn't assume. I guess it might be the same white supremacist group. I hate to say there are lots of them out there, but there unfortunately are. And I heard essentially the same thing, that he had worked with them and that he had gotten his gun legally, actually.
All right, let me see if this article says anything about who that group was. Prior to the shooting, he trained with the Republic of Florida. Now, that is the, quote, white supremacist group. The group's captain, Jordan Jereb, said, as first reported by the Anti-Defamation League. So the Anti-Defamation League are the ones who blew the whistle on the fact.
That's who the source was this morning.
ROF seeks to create a, quote, white ethno-state in Florida, according to the ROF, Republic of Florida website, a view that Cruz supposedly shared. I know he knew full well he was joining a white separatist paramilitary proto-fascist organization, the leader of the group, Jereb, said. Okay? So it's interesting that there is a white nationalist connection to this school shooting, which, you know, bothers me to no end, because we keep seeing these white supremacists popping up in all these events that turn out to be detrimental to the well-being of the communities and to the nation. And why that one resonated with me was because yesterday, as I was going through various news sources in preparation to come in the tape, I came across a story from The Guardian. You know, the Guardian, the British paper?
Right.
Well, they've got a U.S.-based bureau.
Yes.
They have a U.S.-based organization, because I think they have bureaus in a number of places, because their stories are across the country. And their U.S. edition had a phenomenal headline. California police worked with neo-Nazis to pursue anti-racist activists. Documents show. So what they're saying is they went into the California courts with some sort of investigative freedom of information, whatever, to dig into the reports that they had been hearing that the cops were pretty much working with these white fascists to try to nab the people who actually had been attacked during the rally.
It seems so convoluted when when you said it to me and when I read it. And I know there was a couple other cases where, and you had brought it up in an earlier Media Watch, where government provided agitators waded into a crowd and to infiltrate and basically to start something. And it was similar. It was an anti-racist march. It was an anti-Nazi march, and there was collusion with the old right to agitate. And so now we have a similar case of working with, and they got the information through a Freedom of Information type search?
I'm assuming it's Freedom of Information because they're actually quoting California documents.
Okay.
The headline says, officers expressed sympathy with white supremacists and sought their help to target counter-protesters after a violent 2016 rally, according to court documents. I'm quoting from this Guardian article, folks.
That's interesting. And court documents are public documents.
That's it. California police investigating a violent white national event worked with white supremacists in an effort to identify counter-protesters and sought the prosecution of activists with anti-racist beliefs, court documents show. The records, which also showed officers expressing sympathy with white supremacists and trying to protect a neo-Nazi organizer's identity, were included in a court briefing from 3 anti-fascist activists who were charged with felonies.
Okay.
Now, the protesters were charged with felonies after protesting at a Sacramento rally. The defendants were urging a judge to dismiss their case and accuse California police and prosecutors of a cover-up and collusion with the fascists.
Interesting.
Go.
No, I wanted to loop it back to Florida for a second, because you and I had a conversation about this PBS series a few weeks ago. It centered on St. Augustine and the slave trade and the history of, I mean, there was a moment in Florida where blacks were welcome and people of color were welcome.
By the Native Americans who owned Florida, who lived in Florida. And so they had a cooperative alliance in Florida.
and intermarriages were no problem at one point, and there was a point where slaves were escaping to Florida because they knew the treatment would be better. And of course, that reversed, unfortunately, as the U.S. absorbed Florida into the Union, and slave owners didn't want them.
Oh, no. That was the whole U.S. Seminole War, because that was a haven for escaped slaves. And so they wanted to cut that off, and so they launched a campaign of annihilation against the Seminoles.
And we had
eventually remove them west.
Right, the Seminoles, and that being their original home. And at that point, there were groups like the Republic of Florida coming together to protect whites' rights, and so Florida has such a history of this. It doesn't surprise me that these groups are still lively, and I hope they're not burgeoning, but enough to affect this young man to lock into his brain that type of activity is okay, and he's free to go out and express himself like that. I just wanted to tie in the history because I just found that interesting.
I don't know how long he was taking classes and lessons and practicing with this white militia group, because I haven't dug into that story. But I've
seen some of his photos with the mask, with the guns, with some of his posts. So
did he have a social media presence that
he had
was talking about any of this stuff?
Yeah, he was posting photos himself of he was holding couple guns, and he was masked, and he had. I wish I could remember the quote. What he said he would do if he had the chance, something to that effect. I don't want to make anything up here.
Well, what really caught my eye on the Guardian story was the fact that they went into detailed quotes. And here's one of the interesting quotes. In one phone call, first of all, we need to identify who some of these people are. Steve Grippy, the chief deputy district attorney prosecuting the case in Sacramento, vehemently denied the claim of bias in an email to The Guardian, alleging that anti-fascist stabbing victims have been, quote, uncooperative, and noting that his office has filed charges against one member of the Traditionalist Workers' Party. That's the right-wing fascist people, the TWP, Traditionalist Workers' Party, the neo-Nazi group that organized the rally. Some California Highway Patrol investigation records, however, raise questions about the police's investigative tactics and communication with the TWP.
Okay.
One of the defendant's attorneys obtained numerous examples of CHP officers working directly with the TWP, often treating the white nationalist group as victims and the anti-fascists as suspects.
Really?
And here's some of the quote. The TWP intimately allied with neo-Nazi and other hardline racist organizations and advocates for racially pure nations, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Okay,
The
and we
people
draw
who
from
keep track on these groups and these movements better than any other organization in the country,
and
folks.
we draw from them a lot.
Yes, we quote them because this is their mission, to keep track of these folk. Its leaders have praised Trump, and the group claimed to bring more than 100 people to the Charlottesville white supremacist rally, where a counter-protester was killed. In one phone call with Doug McCormack, which I do believe is one of the TWPs, identified by police as the TWP affiliate who acquired the permit for the Sacramento rally, the CHP, California Highway Patrol investigator Donovan Ayers warned him that police might have to release his name in response to a public records request. The officer said he would try to protect McCormack.
Wow.
Quote, "I'm going to suggest that we hold that or redact your name or something until this gets resolved," Ayers told McCormack, adding that he didn't know who had requested the records of the permit and noting, quote, "If I did, I would tell you."
Oh.
Ayers' reports noted that McCormack was armed at the rally with a knife. Okay, so one of the people that he's colluding, talking to, was at the rally with a knife. The officer's write-up about an African-American anti-fascist activist included a photo of him at the hospital after the rally and noted that he had been stabbed in the abdomen, chest, and hand. Ayers, however, treated the protester like a suspect in the investigation.
I see.
The police investigator recommended the man be charged with 11 offenses, including disturbing the peace, conspiracy, assault, unlawful assembly, and wearing a mask to evade police. As evidence, Ayers provided Facebook photos of the man holding up his fists. The officer wrote that the man's, quote, "Black Power salute" and his, quote, "support for anti-racist activism" demonstrated his, quote, "intent and motivation to violate the civil rights of the neo-Nazi group."
That's interesting.
So
yeah.
just this one guy alone, and I'm sure they had quotes from other, but that is what these folk in the California Highway Patrol, that is how they're treating people who are protesting these neo-Nazis, all right?
And this is what they're lifting out of the court record.
This came directly from court record. That's why
impressive.
they have quotes.
Right.
This is, I mean, this isn't, we're alleging these people are doing this.
Right.
This is the court proof that these California highway patrolmen are collaborating and colluding with neo-Nazi right-wing activists. And why are they doing that, folks? So they can find protesters who are protesting against these neo-Nazis and arrest them.
And get them out of the way.
And move them into jail for how many? 11 charges. The only good saving thing to this was the man was ultimately not charged.
Okay.
11 different charges this cop wanted to lay on him.
But it cost him a few court appearances and some blood.
Whatever. But the point of the matter is there's more on this particular story about more communications with more neo-Nazis, more, it's horrendous.
Now, see, I used to be a newspaper reporter, and nobody really looks real deep into court documents because they're boring. I mean, they're voluminous. They're, a lot of times you got to wait for a clerk to go get them. So this is good journalism, is what I'm saying.
Man,
this is between the Guardian and the Southern Poverty Law Center, just to find these documents, because the names are there. It takes work to find it.
They give you the names in this article of 2 other TWP neo-Nazi people who were all armed with knives and were in the vicinity of people who got injured and stabbed. And the thrust of this is, Ayers' report included images and names of 3 other TWP affiliate men who said were armed with knives, but who also have faced no charges.
So it's not an allegation of a layer of protection for the neo-Nazis. It's
obvious.
Yes. If this was a court case, this would be enough circumstantial evidence to show
certain bias on the side of the pops for the neo-Nazi
precisely.
people. Yes. Right. I mean, I don't want to belabor the story because we've got other things we can talk about, but you see, this gets to the heart of what, I mean, actually, there's a key part to this story that we should read. It says, bottom line, closing paragraph. Two closing paragraphs. Police in Charlottesville were widely accused of standing by as Nazis attacked protesters, and a black man who was badly beaten by white supremacists was later charged with a felony. Okay? The black guy who got beat was charged, and that was the Charlottesville massacre. Sam Menifee Libby, an activist who advocated for protesters charged for Inauguration Day rallies last year, Trump's Inauguration Day rally, said the government has repeatedly gone to great lengths to target anti-fascists, and quote, we have patterns of acknowledged and unacknowledged overlaps between the interests of ultra-right nationalist organizations and the police and prosecutors' offices. So this isn't just California, this is Washington, D.C., this is other jurisdictions around the country. And the Guardian headline is really worth repeating. California police worked with neo-Nazis to pursue anti-racist activists. Documents show.
Okay.
It's not made up.
Right.
Comes right out of the court records.
Not alleged.
Not alleged.
Now, this has the scent of what's happening to some of these pro-immigrant activists being rounded up by the federal government every time they come out in public or they show up for a regular event at the immigration center. In New York, it would be the Federal Center down the Jacob Javits building.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, this gentleman Ravi, that's the most famous one locally. He went in for his hearing a few weeks ago, and by the time it was over, he was on a plane. And it took maybe a couple weeks worth of court protests and whatnot, and the judge basically says you can't do this. Yeah. Garufis in Brooklyn, the federal judge in Brooklyn, he was like just aghast at what was happening. And so the gentleman is here for now, but still at the mercy of the immigration authorities. But it has some of the same scent that if you're an activist and you're viewed as in the way, government forces, police, whatever it, an attempt will be made to get you out of the way. He could have been deported rather quickly if enough people hadn't shown up to federal court to block it.
There are any number of cases like that that are now pending across the country, not just here in New York, in other jurisdictions, because ICE has a new mandate under the Trump administration. Right. And they don't care who they round up. They've been getting people who've been here for 35 years, who've got grown children, who've made a living, made a life, have broken no laws. Now, this whole bit about we're targeting all the bad people, we're targeting all the the people who commit felonies, and these are people who don't even have a parking ticket, some of them. And they're rounding them up and putting them in these centers and expediting deportation. The guy was just sent to Mexico. Yeah, being here 35 years.
I saw that. It's stunning.
It's just horrendous.
But the new policy, as far as I know, isn't a written out or declared policy. It just seems to be a seat of the pants. He's in the way. He's in the way. She's in the way.
No, it's not that. It's that Trump in his I reverse everything Obama does mentality.
Right.
When Obama told his ICE people, go after all the bad guys, go after people that you know are on documented evidence of being criminals, have committed felonies, have done deeds that should not keep them here anyway, those are your target. Make those your prime targets. And that was what Obama and his Homeland Security people made the mantra. Donald Trump came in and said, what does this guy do? Oh, that's what he does? No, we're not doing that. Go after whoever you can find. Round up whoever you can find, whether they've committed a law or not. You can tell them that we're only rounding up the people who have broken laws, but as we have seen by these evidence of these cases that you've just raised and that I've read, doesn't matter whether you obey the law or not. No. If there's something that says you are not documented properly, They could care less if you run a business for 35 years,
Right.
paid taxes, supported your community, put kids through school. None of that matters. You become a target, and that's the new mantra.
But I just think it becomes worse if you get your name into the media or if you come out and organize something.
Well, yeah, if you're an activist,
that's going to sort of grease the skids against you.
If you're an activist, they're coming after you.
Right.
Because as an activist, you're protesting against Donald Trump's policies. And anybody that protests against Donald Trump's policies is an enemy of Donald Trump. And because Donald Trump is an authoritarian wannabe, and because Homeland Security and the Justice Department are, quote, his Homeland Security and his Justice Department, then he can mandate by saying, lock them up, go after them. And that's what they've been doing.
But I just want to give Democracy Now! And what's her name, Amy Goodman, a thumbs up, because she had his wife on the air when he was in custody, and she had the two of them on the air as soon as he was released. So they've covered the story top to bottom, back and forth, and where other media sort of covered it lightly. So I need to give him a thumbs up for really digging into that and keeping it on the forefront.
Well, one of the reasons why I want to dig into that neo-Nazi California police thing is because there are stories that we cover and then we don't go back to revisit. And so what I didn't know about that story, but while I was looking at that story, another one came across my desk, which was, you remember middle of last year, we did the story on Media Watch about this very former military, I think he was an ex-Marine, Stephen Mater, who talked a man down during a possible shooting. The guy came out and says, "Why don't you kill me, shoot me anyway," whatever, and the cop said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to de-escalate this." And of course, he was de-escalating, and two other cops came up, shot the guy dead. And of course, when they wrote up the incident, guess who got fired? But the cops that shot the man dead, it was Stephen Mater.
Okay.
So I think we caught the story because he'd filed suit for wrongful termination in the middle of last year, even though it happened a year before.
Right, but it takes a while.
Guess what? Settlement. West Virginia City has agreed to pay a former police officer $175,000 to settle a wrongful termination lawsuit after he was fired following his decision not to shoot a distraught suspect who was holding a gun.
So they're saying that he went against policy?
Yeah. He didn't treat the situation right because that man was armed and because he was flailing about with this weapon. You weren't supposed to de-escalate. I mean, we had this discussion on the show, and the guy said, "No, this guy's not quite in his right mind. I've been trained. We can talk this through. We can get him down." And he was proceeding to do that when these other two cops showed up, and they showed up guns at the ready. They blew the guy away. Point of the matter is, they tried to fabricate a case against the cop who tried to diffuse the situation.
Okay.
And they fired him for supposedly not following their protocol, even though he'd been trained to try to diffuse situations and stuff. And so he filed a suit, saying this is wrongful termination. And we picked up the story when he filed that suit, and we went into detail because it was on the brink of some other shootings that were egregious that we had been covering. And so he said, we found a cop who finally tries his best to diffuse situations, and this guy was beautiful. He kept his calm, he kept his cool, knew the guy was distraught, and could have successfully talked him down. But these other two cops came, they blew him away. And what struck me was the fact that they fired him. They tried to say he didn't follow protocol, and ex-military guy, he said, "No, I did what I was supposed to do, what my training says, so I'm suing." And so I believe it was the American Civil Liberties Union, and quote, "At the end of the day, I'm happy to put this chapter of my life to bed," Mater said in a news release by the American Civil Liberties Union of West Virginia. Quote, "The events leading to my termination were unjustified, and I'm pleased a joint resolution has been met. My hope is that no other person on either end of a police call has to go through this again," end of quote. So he just said, "All right, I'll take my $175,000. I'm glad you folks realized that you were wrong about coming to this," but you know, it bugs me that when you find an officer who actually understands protect and serve, who understands that you're trying to do your best for the people of your community, no matter whether they're mentally off or not, that yes, you can still help without killing them. The fact that they fired him, I was incensed about that. I mean, it was, I know when we did the show, I was incensed about it. I'm glad to see that. I wish it was more than $175,000 because I mean, that's a pittance for
no,
what
they got off cheap. They honestly got off cheap
yeah,
in light of other settlements I've seen.
Yeah, but speaking of talking somebody who's mentally deficient down, you have a local case that came to another resolution today. What was that one?
It just came down this morning, and it's in the case of the Bronx, and we have about 2.5 minutes left, so I'll try to do it quickly. It was in the Bronx, and this mentally ill woman with a bat was waving it around, and police were called to settle the situation. And at the end of the day, an NYPD sergeant ended up shooting her, not tasing her, not knocking her down, not disarming her, but shooting her. So the case finally went to a bench trial, not a jury trial, a bench trial.
That's a judge.
That's before a judge alone.
Yeah, just no jury, no. Okay, so
this came down this morning. And we're taping Thursday before the Monday broadcast. Bronx Supreme Court Judge Robert Neary cleared NYPD Sergeant Hugh Barry in the October 18, 2016 death of Deborah Danner, 66, who was shot twice after a seconds-long standoff with the cop in her Castle Hill bedroom. And it says the sergeant sat stoically as the judge announced the verdict. And this was a case where, and we've had this on the show a couple times, where it could have been, should have been, might have been talked down without a death relatively easily. She was mentally ill. They told people around the situation, said she was mentally ill. She had a bat. She was 66 years old. Stepping back would have avoided any injury. Throwing a chair would have avoided the death. But we have about a minute left. This is completely the opposite of this officer trying to de-escalate. We have one that just shot first with about 45 seconds left.
I remember the story we wanted to talk about, the fact that the Justice Department arrested a white supremacist terrorist for some railroad track stuff. We'll talk about it the next show because they quietly did this without any publicity or any fanfare. So,
yes, we'll definitely need to get back to that one.
So this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And we'll catch you the next time. Hopefully we'll have more to do of a more positive nature.
And you'll catch us on YouTube and Twitter at Media Watch EVT.